gap in the fight against Ebola in the DRC. And Juba prepares to take in South Sudanese refugees living in neighboring countries. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand. Africa Live. Find your voice. Welcome back. We start now with news from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The UN says it's increasing efforts to contain the Ebola outbreak in the DRC by working closely with political and religious leaders in East Africa's Ebola hotspots. The fight against the disease has been hampered by regional fighting and a lot of misconceptions from locals. CGTN's Chris Ochomoringa has more from Kinshasa.
The Ebola outbreak in the DRC has experienced a spike in activity, with nearly 50 new cases recorded by the country's health ministry over the past 3 days. The Mabalako health zone in the east is one of the areas reporting an increase in cases. That's the zone where a 5-year-old boy who crossed into Uganda with Ebola is believed to have contracted the disease. The boy has since died. The UN says it's working with local leaders in these Ebola hotspots to help health workers contain the outbreak.
There is no one solution to overcoming that. And that's what we sit down and work together among ourselves, with our partners, and certainly with the government and the Ministry of Health, how to figure out how to overcome security issues, other issues of protests.
But efforts have been hampered by attacks on health workers and treatment centers in the North Kivu province. Officials say close to 1,500 people have died of the deadly disease since the outbreak was first reported in August last year. And a severe funding gap to contain the disease has been reported by the World Health Organization, who are calling on world leaders to help contribute towards efforts to end the outbreak. Chris Ochomoringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
A joint high-level UN-EU delegation led by the UN peacekeeping chief Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Deputy Secretary-General of the EU Pedro Serrano is visiting Mali to take stock of progress made in the implementation of the peace agreement. Now, the delegation has met with local authorities and civil society groups and is also seeking ways to enhance support by the UN and the European Union to accelerate the implementation of the agreement.
The current situation is alarming, with the horrible massacres of last week. That's why we came here with the Deputy Secretary General of the European Union to show solidarity and unity, as well as to show that we are ready to increase our support to Malian efforts.
Nous sommes venus ici pour exprimer notre solidarité dans des temps qui sont quand même
We need a Malian approach, solutions and propositions. We talked about that today with local authorities and civil society. We encourage them to carefully study the problems and find possible solutions to be implemented by Malians themselves.
The United Nations Refugee Agency says it's working with South Sudan in preparation for the return of the country's nationals living in other countries as refugees. 2.3 million South Sudanese people are refugees in neighboring countries such as Uganda, Sudan, Ethiopia and Kenya. This as a result of the 6 years of war in their country. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports from Juba.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in South Sudan says it hopes many of the country's nationals who are still refugees will return home. A peace deal signed by President Salva Kiir and opposition groups last September is bringing relative peace to the country. UNHCR says it's working to put in place basic infrastructure.
We want to create a place that they are safe to return. And then when they return, that they have all the basic services, such as a school, safe water, and also the hospital.
South Sudan is also a host to more than 300,000 refugees, mainly from Sudan and Democratic Republic of Congo. 6 years of war has forced some refugees to abandon the camps and move to cities, but city life is proving to be challenging for many.
We need the camps and cities we are living in today to become places where we refugees can obtain skills and knowledge that would benefit us whether we return or whether we have to stay.
Many of these refugees have learned arts and crafts which they use to earn some money. Majority of South Sudanese people have at one time in their life been refugees, and they say they can relate very well with stories of people moving out of their countries to other countries in order to protect their lives. South Sudan's government also says it's developing a refugee-friendly law.
South Sudan is accepting refugees to do business. If you want to farm, like I'm seeing some refugees, they have their small gardens. If you want to have a small business, even fetching water and selling water, this is a clean business, clean money. This is good.
UNHCR is urging governments to do more to bring peace to the East African region. It says as long as peace remains elusive, many, especially women and children, would be forced to become refugees. But it hopes to help create an environment in South Sudan that refugees currently abroad will be keen to return to. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Tanzania is looking for assistance in addressing environmental challenges caused by refugee activity in the country's Kigoma region. The area around the camp has lost over 50% of its vegetation in over 26 years. Tanzania hosts about 320,000 refugees and asylum seekers from Burundi and the DRC, with 90% living in camps in the Kigoma region. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
Tanzania's decades of generosity in caring for refugees does not only have an economic cost, but an environmental one as well. Most of the refugees in Tanzania are settled in 3 camps, namely Nyarugusu, Nduta, and Mtendeli, located in Kigoma region. It has led to the loss of over 20 billion trees over 20 years due to firewood, charcoal, and settlement needs.
Communities that have opened their doors to people fleeing conflict and persecution should not have to suffer alone for their generosity. The increased population size puts extra pressure on already stretched resources.
About a third of the world's refugees have been welcomed by developing nations such as Tanzania. Last year, the United Nations recognized that a transformation was needed in response to handle the refugee crisis and introduced a global impact on refugees as a tool to assist both refugees and the countries that host them. With over 300,000 refugees still in Tanzania, the government says it will continue to provide a home for them, but it is calling on the global community to increase support. The government says over the last 2 years, it has replanted 18% of the lost vegetation cover, but now it needs help.
Environmental degradation is not something to ignore. So on behalf of the government, I call out to the international community to collaborate with government to work on this challenge in order to get a solution for alternative energy sources for refugees and nearby communities to use.
As Tanzania continues to climb the development ladder and face population growth, pressure on its resources is inevitable. It will need to find solutions that work to ease these pressures whilst it continues to support those in need of sanctuary. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Let's go to Senegal now, where the first African summit on female genital mutilation and child marriage has concluded in the capital, Dakar. The summit focused on strategies to eradicate these traditional practices by 2030. CGTN's Laura Walubengo has more.
Leaders from at least 20 countries in Africa and the rest of the world attended the summit. Discussions highlighted the plight of girls in Africa, promoting an accelerated implementation of a zero-tolerance policy on FGM and child marriage by 2030.
To end female genital mutilation across the world, across Africa, partnership very important. Governments need to lead by introducing laws, policies, and put in place programs that are financed using domestic resources.
With 76.3%, Niger has the highest rate of child marriage in Africa. To end this, there is a mechanism that has been implemented with an action plan to combat child marriage.
Islamic law, known as fatwa, has been adopted in efforts to reinforce the bridge between Africa and the rest of the world.
The culmination of this summit is the declaration of the fatwa. We all know that the foundation of female genital mutilation is of religious and cultural origin. The fatwa that was declared today by the Vice Imam of the Great Mosque of Al-Azhar in Egypt is the essential point of this summit, but also the commitment of activists and the leaders who took part in the meeting.
As a survivor, I think that female genital mutilation and child marriage will not be stopped by Westerners. We Africans should confront this problem head-on for total eradication.
According to UNICEF, more than 200 million women and girls continue to suffer the effects of FGM in Africa and the world, with more than 50 million others at risk of becoming victims by 2030. Although the prevalence of FGM is declining in several countries, great resistance continues to be witnessed in several others, such as Somalia, Guinea, Djibouti and Mali. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has completed his state visit to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, leaving Pyongyang after talks with leader Kim Jong-un. The two-day state visit started on Thursday and was the first by a Chinese president in 14 years. Chinese President Xi Jinping says Beijing is willing to join Pyongyang in opening up a bright future for bilateral ties.
Chinese President Xi Jinping landed in Pyongyang on Thursday, kicking off the first visit to the state by a Chinese top leader in 14 years. Xi's trip comes as China and the DPRK mark their 70th anniversary of diplomatic ties. He was accompanied by his wife Peng Liyuan, top diplomats, and economic planners. Xi was welcomed by DPRK leader Kim Jong-un at the Pyongyang Sunan International Airport, where a grand ceremony was held. A military band played the national anthems of both countries. Xi and Kim review the honor guards of the DPRK army. Thousands of residents, most in traditional attire, lined the streets of the capital, waving flowers and holding banners heralding the friendship between the two nations. Xi and Kim then held a meeting at a Kumsun-san Palace of the Sun, where their talks centered on bilateral relations as well as concerns on the Korean Peninsula. Xi reflected on the 70 years of diplomatic ties between China and the DPRK, which he says are bounded by similar beliefs and goals, in line with the fundamental interests and long-term strategy of both nations. Xi promised that ties would not change despite changes in the global environment. He also expressed willingness to boost the communication with Kim and improve political mutual trust, especially on issues of major concern. He said parties from both sides will have more exchanges on governing experiences. When it came to denuclearization, she said Beijing recognizes Pyongyang's concern on security and development and is willing to help the government address them. He said China would like to work with all parties to find a political solution to the issues on the Korean Peninsula. Meanwhile, Kim said President Xi's visit would help to direct the future relations and showcase the unbreakable bond between the two countries. He also said the DPRK would like to learn from China on how to improve its economy and its people's well-being. He stressed that his country has made significant efforts in easing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, but was disappointed by the response. However, he said Pyongyang would exercise patience and continue to work with all parties to find a resolution. At the welcome banquet held Thursday evening, President Xi recalled the 70 years of relations between China and the DPRK. He hailed the traditional friendship, calling it a shared, valuable asset forged and left by leaders of elder generations. He also said that such a friendship has remained strong and vigorous despite constant changes. Xi said the two countries have drawn a plan for a bright future of bilateral ties and reached a streak of major consensus during their meetings. He reiterated that China will firmly support Kim in seeking a political solution to the Korean Peninsula denuclearization issue, as well as improving the people's livelihood and economic development through the establishment of a new strategic route. After reflecting on the close bond between the two countries, President Xi watched a gymnastics and art performance with Kim at the May Day Stadium. The DPRK state media said the performance was specially prepared for Xi's visit and included many famous Chinese songs. Yang Zhao, CGTN.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's coming up in your business news. South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa to drive job creation and rescue Eskom, among other priorities in his State of the Nation address. And the cost of living in Zimbabwe doubles in the month of May.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your business news, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has outlined his priorities for his administration during his State of the Nation address. Speaking to Parliament in Cape Town on Thursday night, he acknowledged that while South Africa is facing economic struggles, his government is determined to create jobs. CGTN's Rene Delcam reports.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says South Africa has done a lot to meet the basic needs of people over the past 25 years of democracy. But during a State of the Nation address before Parliament, he said the country had inherited a devastated economy built to serve the interests of a few during apartheid.
Not enough jobs are being created in our country. This is the concern that rises above all others. It affects everyone. It affects every household.
President Cyril Ramaphosa said the persistent legacy of apartheid had left South Africa with extreme structural problems, both economic and social. And in a country where there was negative economic growth and limited public finances, economic transformation and job creation had to be top priorities. He vowed his government would create 2 million jobs over the next decade. He said it would also take urgent action to help rescue South Africa's major cash-strapped power utility, Eskom, by delivering a significant portion of the $16 billion of financial support that Eskom will require over the next decade.
This we must do because Eskom is too vital to our economy and it cannot be allowed to fail. Eskom is our collective responsibility as a nation and we must make sure that we support it.
But the State of the Nation address received a mixed response from political parties.
South Africa is in crisis. It needs a plan today. We should have spoken about cities and how we can allocate more budgeting to make sure cities are able to respond to economic responses. Today, it felt like the president was living in his own planet while the rest of the country is living a nightmare.
The biggest disappointment is that Cyril wanted to be president for the past 3 decades, but he doesn't know why he wanted to be president.
You need to attract investors, work together with labor, business, civil society and government. That partnership of society is very, very important, and it will ignite once more our economy.
Challenges that many opponents say sound good on paper but are short on details. Renee Dalcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, let's bring you some analysis now on that State of the Nation address. We're joined from Johannesburg by Gideon Chitanga, a political analyst at the Center for the Study of Democracy. Gideon, thank you so much for your time. Well, if the dropping or the fall of the South African rand is anything to go by, there hasn't been an overall positive response to Ramaphosa's speech. Just talk us through the reaction.
Sorry. Thank you for your question. I think that there are mixed response to the State of the Nation, and this is a very important State of the Nation given that it marks the beginning of the what I would call the Ramaphosa regime. But the major reasons for mixed reactions are not necessarily in the statement itself, but I think they are more informed by the context in which Ramaphosa is giving the statement, the diverse interests and the contradictions within the ruling party, within the South African society, the polarized expectations. So each of the sections of society and key players and stakeholders come into this State of the Nation address wanting different things. And I take that President Ramaphosa's strategy is to try as much as possible to manage the diverse interests. And in the current context, there isn't much evidence to say that his big bus kind of approach where he's including everybody in what he's trying to do is paying immediate dividends. I would foresee a situation where if his strategy works, then maybe in the medium to long term, then we can judge the response to the SONA and to his overall policy thrust.
Yeah, of course, it is very difficult to make everybody happy, but perhaps one organization that might be smiling is Eskom. Of course, the president announced a commitment to pump an extra $16 billion into the struggling power utility, also saying that a new CEO will be announced. I mean, will this work? Essentially, it seems we can't decide what Eskom's problem is. Is it financial or is it a leadership challenge?
I think the problems at Eskom are beyond the financial aspect or the leadership aspect as isolated elements of the challenges that Eskom is facing. The problems should be located within a broader historical context in terms of the energy needs of South Africa as a country, which is about 56 million people in its population. Eskom was built within a structured apartheid system which catered for about 5 million. Then I think it was far less than 5 million people, purely white. And the transition from apartheid to where we are today has increased the demands for Eskom in such a way which was not envisaged at the time when it was built. But having said that, I think it is the new government since 1994 continuously ignored indications and indicators to the fact that Eskom was failing And then there are structural problems, including governance problems, which emerged mostly out of the era of President Zuma's government. So financially, Eskom is in huge debt, about 400 billion in the red. In terms of governance and its leadership, it is at the center of what we call state capture here in South Africa, which means state-embedded corruption, which was transferred into Eskom as an entity, and it has lost a lot of money. It has ended up over employing people by 66%, according to the World Bank, and it has serious structural problems. There is a current debate going on as to whether Eskom should be privatized, and if so or if not, to what extent it should be privatized, and to what extent government should continue to carry Eskom. So these are immediate problems, but they have a historical context where a lot of black South Africans immediately got access to electricity, to energy, if you like, since 1994. Some of these people are poor blacks who cannot afford to pay for electricity, but they need to access electricity. So I think that it's important that President Ramaphosa mentions Eskom and immediately avails financial support to it. But the solutions should immediately go to beyond. In fact, there is need for adequate financial support. There is need for immediate structural changes within Eskom itself, and decisions must be made at the top about that. Then there is need to expand and explore other alternative sources of energy.
We'll have to leave it there, Gideon. I'm afraid we are out of time, but thank you so much for that analysis. Joining us live from Johannesburg, Gideon Chitanga from the Center for the Study of Democracy. Let's turn to Zimbabwe now. The country's year-on-year inflation has risen to 97.8%. That's from 75% back in April. Distressed citizens are finding it increasingly hard to cope with the rapidly rising costs of living. Thorai Makutuya takes up the story.
Soaring parallel forex market rates have propelled inflation to a 10-year high, just 2.2 points shy of triple digits. Many here are barely able to keep their heads above water.
The teacher is in a deficit of not less than $3,500 RTGS dollars. That means that the teacher is unable primarily to provide for their own food, and they are not able to meet their own obligations in terms of utilities, in terms of rentals. They are not able to send their own children to school.
The average teacher earns 580 RTGS dollars, about $58 at the current black market rate, far short of the 4,100 RTGS dollars demanded in ongoing wage negotiations with government. But even that amount could quickly be eroded by the unrelenting inflation.
If we don't sort out the electricity issue, that will increase the cost of doing business. If we don't sort out, in terms of having, the basic commodities available in all our shops, if we don't manage that, I think there's a lot, price pressures that will continue, to push inflation up there.
Zimbabwe's finance minister seems to differ, projecting prices to taper by the third quarter in response to fiscal reforms. Those burdened by the ever-increasing cost of living are losing hope.
Remember this idea of prices falling and new shops coming with cheaper products. I have not come across any shop that has been opened by government with cheaper products, but this was promised. The prices were going to start falling in April. We have not seen them falling in April. And the issue of stabilization now seems like it's a missed target. We are no longer stable. Instead, we are sinking deeper.
The lack of confidence could deter government's recovery program.
When you implement austerity measures and you don't have, a poverty alleviation plan, sometimes, that policy tends to backfire. I have so many case studies of the countries that have tried to implement austerity measures, but that policy, didn't end well, and they had, to abandon it earlier and, pursue other policies.
For now, authorities are intent to push it through and hope it will eventually end the pain of price increases. Thorai Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Ministers and economic experts from the Middle East and North Africa region are meeting in Tunisia to develop strategies to strengthen integration of the region. The MENA OECD Initiative for Governance and Competitiveness is chaired by Tunisia for the period 2016 to 2020. Adnan Chouachi reports.
The steering group of the MENA OECD Initiative on Governance and Competitiveness held a meeting in Tunis on the theme Partnering for Shared Prosperity. Authorities in Tunis said the regional integration of the Middle East and North Africa remains a difficult challenge to reach at present, given the escalation of conflict in some countries.
The region's economic integration is impossible amid political instability and insecurity. It's below 10%. Many of the region's countries are facing enormous security challenges, which hinder any economic activity.
The Moroccan minister in charge of public affairs and governance views setting long-term goals as a condition for the region's prosperity.
Investments will not be made in the region as long as there's no confidence in the future. Foreign investors need a favorable climate. The war on graft and the guarantee of transparency also favors economic development in the region.
The EU ambassador to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development pointed out that the challenges facing the MENA region are manifold.
There are two priorities. First, re-establishing the confidence of the region's citizens in governments. For this, we have a program called Governance. It aims to provide the government's best service to the people. Second, the competitiveness, which is based on identifying the suitable products and jobs for youth and women for better regional integration.
Tunisian and foreign experts view the distribution of wealth, diversification of economies and overcoming the digital divide as priorities in the region. On the occasion of the meeting of the MENA OECD Initiative on Governance and Competitiveness, the Minister of Investment pointed out the need for MENA countries to harness the potential of digital transformation and innovative entrepreneurship to unleash the potential for growth and development in the region. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Let's relieve your business news still ahead on Africa Live. Celebrating life, a 100-year-old yoga teacher shares with us her secret to longevity.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A yoga teacher who is 100 years old says the secret to longevity is to live every day full of joy. Tao Pochon Lynch shows no sign of slowing down, embracing her second century with the same joie de vivre and can-do attitude that has shaped her life since she discovered yoga as a young girl at 7 years old. CGTN's Beryl Oro reports.
Bend the knees in towards
These yoga poses are a struggle for most, but not for this remarkable lady. Tao Pochon Lynch, who turns 101 in a few months, says she has no plans to stop.
I was about 7 and I went along the beach in French India and I saw some boys and I thought, oh, that's good. I'm going to do that. So I did the same thing. They were tuning in And they said to me, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing the same thing they're doing. They said, but that's not for ladies. It's not ladylike. I said, well, boys can do it, I can do it. So all my life I've been in, if there is something that's in there that's good, go and do it. Don't just spend your time thinking about it. And now come forward over your hand.
Poshon Lynch teaches her students to focus their breathing around their heart, opening their chest and not breathing into the lower abdomen.
So I guess the first time where I put it into practice, knowing what I was doing, was around the age of 14 or 16, where people were asking me about things, because some people were sitting like this. And I said, you're squashing your lungs. Your lungs are not down into navel, they're above. The door of your life is here, not down here.
With 100 years of life, her philosophy is to embrace every day with joy.
When I wake up in the morning, I look at the sun and I say, this is going to be the best day of my life. And it will be. It always is. So I wake up with the joy of life, knowing it's ready to go inside of me. And so I see all of my students that are so precious to me and that have done so much to keep me doing things in life. And so that's why I'm here today.
Her life is a yoga path. And the yoga path is her life, and that's how she approaches it. And that's what emanates from her. And we soak it up. Her students soak that up. We eventually get that at some point in our life. Certainly I did. It took a long time, but I got it in my life.
Take a breath.
Poshon Lynch inspires her students to embrace a more open, freeing path to life. Earlier this year, Poshon Lynch was awarded the prestigious Padma Shri Award from the Government of India for exceptional achievement. For the past 20 years, she has also trained and competed in ballroom dance competitions, including on TV in the show America's Got Talent. Teo is still teaching her local weekly class and workshops and dancing 3 times a week. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up in your sports news. FIFA set to take over the reins at the Confederation of African Football over corruption claims.
Africa, where champions are made